Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are my rankings for the best passive treasures in the new Kobolds and Catacombs dungeon run mode. Now, if you haven't heard, of course, the new expansion has been revealed, Kobolds and Catacombs, and there will be a new single-play experience introduced in that expansion called Dungeon Runs. And how these work are, they're a little bit like arena runs, but with a twist and only single player. You're playing against AI bosses, much like in past adventure modes. And essentially you'll be building a deck and a character that improves over time. So you'll start with just a handful of weak cards, but every time you beat a boss, you'll be receiving loot, treasure, which means additional cards for your deck, but also some extra interesting treasure style cards, a couple of which you'll see behind me on the screen right now. And there are two kinds of treasure cards. Some of them are actual active playable cards that are added to your deck that do just absurdly overpowered things. And the other kinds are the kind that we're going to focus on in this video today, which are passive treasure cards. So these just give your deck or your gameplay experience some sort of passive benefit, a default boost, like for instance Captured Flag, you'll see right next to me. Gives your minions +1/+1, and you can get multiple instances of Captured Flag, so for the rest of the run your minions are all going to have essentially a Prince Keliseth style buff, but there are a different variety of options and you get to pick which treasure you want. As you'll see on the screen behind me, this is the UI for picking a treasure. So essentially, you have a choice on how to improve the power level of your deck, and that's exactly why I wanted to make this video, because sometimes those choices are going to be difficult, and I wanted to talk about which of these passive effects I think are going to be the strongest on average. Now, of course, depending upon the class you're playing, depending on the style of deck you're trying to build, certain things might work better than others. If you have a really spell-heavy, spell-focused deck, you might not want a minion-based passive, but if you're building more of an aggressive deck, you're definitely going to want some stats on your minions. So I'm going to try to play around that as much as possible as I rank these cards and just talk about them, generally speaking, on average, which of these are going to be the best. But of course, as always, you'll have to use your own discretion when making choices in this mode to get the best results given your own deck. And I trust you guys to make strategic choices with just a little bit of background on my thoughts on these cards. So let's go ahead and jump into my rankings for the best passive treasure cards in the Kobolds and Catacombs Dungeon Run mode. Starting off at the number 7 spot, or the worst of the passive treasure cards that Blizzard has revealed so far, is Potion of Vitality, and this one will double your hero's starting health. And if you've played Hearthstone for any time, you know that health is really just a resource that you can sacrifice in order to win the board. Because when you win the board in Hearthstone, you tend to win the game, and you can lose a little health along the way as long as you're gaining advantage of the board. And I think that's going to be especially true in a dungeon run style mode. So although you might want one of these eventually to sort of pad yourself depending upon your style of deck, particularly if you're playing a slower, more control style deck, ultimately you're going to be looking for things that have a more direct impact on the tempo of the game and on the board presence of the game. So things like those extra stats and spending mana more efficiently are all going to go a lot farther towards winning the battle as opposed to doubling your health, which could just make you lose twice as slow, which doesn't help you at the end of the day. You need to win Hearthstone and win the game, not just stay alive a little bit longer and a little bit longer, because without other resources to give you an advantage, to help you swing the board back in your favor, to take control, you're still going to lose. So that's why Potion of Vitality, to me, looks like the weakest of the passive treasure cards. Up next at the number 6 spot, we have Small Backpacks. And this passive card just allows you to draw 2 extra cards at the start of the game. Now, of course, card draw is good in Hearthstone, but yet again, much like our previous card, this one does not directly impact the board state of the game nor the tempo of the game. So unfortunately, in a lot of ways, this one might just not pay off that many dividends. If you have things that you were going to be able to play on curve anyway, then you're not gaining as much from this one as you might with something like minion stats or some of the other more active, tempo-oriented passive cards that are going to be ahead on this list. So essentially, this one does give you some flexibility and some options and perhaps prevents you from running out of cards if you're running a hyper-aggressive kind of deck. but I don't think hyper-aggressive kinds of decks are going to be the best kinds as you wear on in the dungeon run. Things are just going to get more challenging and more challenging, and a mere 2 cards is not going to be enough to get your deck over the hump when it comes to exhausting its resources. So this one just feels weaker. Now, it does arguably get stronger and stronger if you have some of the other passive treasures available. So, you know, for instance, if you've gotten +1/+1 a few times and your minions are all giant, super buffed dudes, then drawing 2 extras of them goes a little farther. But ultimately, this might be the kind of thing you grab near the end of a run as opposed to near the beginning of a run, because I just don't think it's going to make nearly enough of a direct impact on the game to make sense, especially the earlier in a dungeon run you are. Moving on to the number 5 spot here, we have Mysterious Tome. And this passive treasure card will play 3 random secrets for you at the start of the game. Now that is the first of our cards, which really is a tempo infusion. It just spends some mana, puts some cards into play, and that's nice. That's good. That's going to make a more direct and faster impact on how the game actually unfolds. The problem with Mysterious Tome for me and why it ranks a little farther down on this list is because random secrets just aren't that good on average. The first problem is that you have a lot of Paladin secrets, which are especially bad earlier in the game, like Getaway Kodo and Redemption aren't good on 1 and 2 mana minions. They just don't do that much. And of course, there are also just some terrible things like Eye for an Eye in the Paladin set that are also really difficult to work with and just don't help you. Even Hunter secrets can fail from time to time. They just don't contribute that much. Most Mage secrets are going to be good, right? Those are sort of free 3 mana plays, which is fantastic. But even then, when you're not controlling the secrets and not influencing their timing, then it doesn't really help that much. You know, you're not going to love your Mirror Entity target, for instance, when it's on turn 1 and your opponent plays some tiny 1/1. That's pretty bad. You're not going to be happy about a counter spell that hits the first spell that's cast because it's going to be a low cost counter spell. So essentially, even when you roll really well with Mysterious Tome and you get the high end of the variance of the randomness, I still think it's rather low in its impact and its strategy. And then occasionally you're also just going to really roll low and hit 3 useless Paladin secrets and feel really bad and feel like you wasted your passive treasure. So this one's a little bit of a risk-reward calculation that leans a little too far towards the risk side of things for my liking. So now let's move on to the number 4 spot, and this is Glyph of Warding. And this one's pretty cool and a huge tempo advantage because it makes all of your enemy's minions cost 1 additional mana. And that's a huge penalty and a huge price to pay, of course, for your opponent. And this one could almost be the best card on this list if it weren't for one potential downside, and that is that a lot of the power level that is bundled into the opposing AI-controlled heroes, first off, comes from their hero power. In most cases, they're going to have overpowered hero powers that make them really strong, and this doesn't affect those hero powers. And in the second case, they also just run a lot of overpowered kinds of spells. Clearly, they run overpowered minions too, but it's split, right? Sometimes it's powerful spells, sometimes it's powerful minions, and in the cases where you're playing a deck that has a ton of powerful spells, well, guess what? This card is basically going to be useless. If they're all about spells and all about hero powers, then you're just kind of up to randomness of what hero you end up playing against and whether or not your cards work. The cards ahead on this list, the cards I'm ranking higher than Glyph of Warding, a lot of those are more proactive and you sort of control how influential they are, so I don't think they're quite as susceptible to the variance of your opponent, and that's an important distinction to me. So Glyph of Warding is inarguably very, very strong. Completely busted in its power level. It's just only busted some of the time, and that is a problem. So up next we have the top 3, and you'll basically see the other side of that coin with this one. This has a very similar effect in that your spells cost 1 less, so a very similar sort of tempo cost style effect as opposed to your opponent's costing 1 more. Your stuff costs 1 less, but this time around it's spells. And I like this one better because, as I said, you control how influential this is because you are building your deck. You're picking packages of cards to upgrade your deck, and you can pick a spell-based package if you have Khadgar's Scrying Orb as one of your passive treasures. So you can build your deck in a way that makes this one advantageous, and you're not completely reliant upon the RNG of your opponent. So I like that you have the control. Now, ultimately, spells costing 1 less, of course, is very, very powerful. I don't think it's quite as powerful as minions costing 1 less because, of course, minions are repeatable damage on the board. They're much more directly influential most of the time. But still, of course, getting a big AoE spell that's reduced or some sort of value generating spell that costs less, cheating it out a turn sooner than normal can indeed be very powerful in game swinging and game winning. So that's why Khadgar Scrying Orb is in the top 3, if not one of the very best passive treasure options. So now let's move on to the number 2 spot with Justicar's Ring. And Justicar is going to sound like a very familiar term to a lot of people if you played Hearthstone in the Grand Tournament era with Justicar Trueheart, which also upgraded your hero powers. This card does the very same thing, and in fact, it's a little better because it's free and passive at the start of the game. Of course, you don't have to spend 6 mana to do that, and it also makes your hero powers cost 1. So you're getting a mana reduction across the board, and you're getting essentially a free resource that is now actually quite powerful and contributes a lot to often controlling the board or influencing the board state of Hearthstone, all of which are fantastic things. Now, of course, the one caveat with Justicar's Ring is that it's going to be better with some classes than with other classes. For instance, Warlock in particular, I don't think you gain a lot from Justicar's Ring because you're just saving life, and as I already denoted with our 7th pick on this list, I don't think life gain is going to be the most important thing in dungeon runs. It's clearly still valuable, but not as important as controlling the board. Similarly, Warriors are going to have a little bit of trouble, I think, with Justicar's Ring, simply because, again, it's just life gain, and you really need something that directly impacts the board. But of course, if you are playing one of those classes that benefits a lot, I'd say Druid, Mage, Paladin, maybe Rogue, maybe even Priest a little bit, depending on if you already have minions on board, or at least strong minions that are easily healed. In those cases, Justicar's Ring is going to do an absurd amount of work, and it's something that you absolutely need to pick. So keep a special close attention for this potential card whenever you are running one of those classes that benefits in a huge way. And I am sure that Justicar's Ring will carry you very far in the dungeon run. But I don't think it will get you as far as my number 1 pick. This is Captured Flag, which admittedly is a pretty boring name and artwork, and I don't even really understand exactly why it's relevant. It's almost like we're playing a game of Capture the Flag, but I don't know why that's happening in a catacomb with kobolds, nor do I know why that's buffing your minions. But regardless, this passive treasure gives your minions +1/+1 for the rest of the game. It is essentially a Prince Keleseth buff, but forever and always by default. And in fact, you could even stack this one to get multiple bigger minions all the time. So Captured Flag is really, really strong, right? You can just build a minion-based deck where minions become almost impossible to remove. They apply a lot more pressure. They're making better trades for all the reason that, you know, Keleseth, Shadowstep Keleseth is an amazing kind of play. Captured Flag is going to be good for the very same reason. And of course, you can draft your deck in a way to support this card where you pick mostly minions or minions that benefit from having buffs. There are a lot of ways to take advantage of Captured Flag as far as I'm concerned. And that is why pretty obviously and even pretty decisively, I think this is going to be your best bet in a vast majority of dungeon runs. I don't think you can ever go wrong with Captured Flag, putting it at the number 1 spot for passive treasures in the Kobolds and Catacombs dungeon runs. And there you have it, folks. Next time you choose a treasure in Kobolds and Catacombs, you're going to be equipped to pick the right one, which might just be this one, Captured Flag. But I'm curious what you guys think. What do you think about these passive treasures? What do you think about the Kobolds and Catacombs dungeon runs? Which ones do you think are going to be the best? Which ones do you think are going to be the weakest? I want to hear your take on all these different cards. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.